Welcome. The video you're about to watch was first filmed in 1987 and features a dear close friend of mine, the late Dr. Paul M. D'Amico. The information contained on this video is as relevant today as it was back then. Thanks for watching.
People are here today because you'd like to learn a little bit about the disease of addiction. And there's one of the things we can tell you today, that there's been a real, genuine breakthrough in this field. It is little known, but nevertheless, there has been a genuine breakthrough in this field, and it has come out of what we call the field of psychobiology or psychopharmacology. And so today, hopefully, we will not have a lecture. We were going to have, hopefully, an experience. A trip. And we're going to start on this trip by saying this. Whenever a person has any type of biochemical dependency, that drug has to be mood altering and it affects your moods. The drugs that affect your moods are in the human brain, and therefore whatever is going on, however this disease is being developed, is coming out of the human brain. And as we go along, we're going to show you that by the taking of various psychochemicals, you have altered the mix of those chemicals and created biochemical needs and alternate moods that demand relief. And this will be the development of a real biological disorder and disease. Now, if you go and leave this hospital or go to other hospitals, generally speaking, this will be treated as a psychiatric problem, and they'll use a psychiatric model, and they'll have proof for their model, because some people do get well if they take and use a psychiatric model. They do get well. We do know, though, that not as many get well as other models. When you go to other hospitals, you're generally treated by a psychiatrist on a psychiatric part of the hospital with other psychiatrically disturbed patients, and sometimes you are actually locked in. In other cases, you are treated differently. Some people say this is a strictly spiritual problem. All the people in AA and NA say that this is a spiritual problem, and that before you took any mood-altering substances, that you had to leave the spiritual order of life, and you had to misuse a good substance, that you had to break down and injure yourself and your families. You had to compromise your morals, and therefore they feel that to get back to normal reality, you must go back to the spiritual order of life, and they will say that you must now turn a new leaf over and enter into a spiritual program that will represent spiritual progress in your life. And by staying in the spiritual order the rest of your life, you will be able to successfully arrest the disease of addiction. And since it's chronic disease, you must stay in the spiritual order the rest of your life, and therefore you must be a member of AA and NA for the rest of your life. And we know that's the most successful program, even if it's not accepted by orthodox medicine. We do know that's the most successful program. And then there are those who say this is a social problem. If there's no alcohol in the community, there are no alcoholics. If there's no junk in the community, there are no junkies. When enough people believed that this was a primary social problem, they had social legislation, and guess what? They had what they called the prohibition. And during that time, there was a dramatic drop in the disease of addiction, dramatic drop in cirrhosis of the liver that can be checked out by the statistics if you wish to check them. So today there are still many people who believe in a social model, and you will be treated by them differently than those who believe in the biological or spiritual model, or in the psychiatric model or psychological model. So how are we going to put this together so that you understand this? How are you going to be able to understand what's going on if the different people that come into your life are treating you, some from a psychological point of view, some from a social point of view, others from a spiritual point of view, and others yet from a biological point of view. And today I can tell you there's a breakthrough, and what we're going to do is we're going to start with biology and out of that basic framework we're going to move on to spirituality and sociology and put the whole ball of wax for you. And we'll be able to literally define the disease of addiction as a primary, chronic, neuroendocrine disorder of the brain and the autonomic nervous system. And autonomic means that you don't have the control you think you have in a destructive way, especially on the sympathetic part of that autonomic system that has behavioral ramifications. And we now know where all of these drugs act. All mood-altering drugs act on what are called neurotransmitters in the human brain. Neurotransmitters are really neuroendocrine agents, biologicals in the human brain, and you must understand what these substances are and how they act to understand the disease. Years ago, and I would say about 40 or 50 years ago, we used to think that information entering into the human brain did so on a series of wires and different circuits that were modulated by exchange systems, just like a telephone system with exchanges. And that's how we thought the system worked. And then they discovered what was called the electron microscope, and they applied the electron microscope to the human brain, and they began to discover something that shocked them. They began to discover that between every single nerve cell was a space or a gap. Now, if there's a space or a gap between every single nerve cell, how does the information go from cell to cell and distribute itself throughout the system? It's like saying that you have a wire cut up in different segments. How does the information then distribute itself throughout the system? So they were flabbergasted, and they didn't understand now what was going on, and they couldn't understand how the system worked. So they began an intensive study, and they began to discover that each one of these nerve cells was bathed in various neurohormones and chemicals. At first they called them neurochemicals, meaning chemicals in the brain and nervous system. They didn't even know how they worked. And then they began to understand that these neurochemicals allowed the transmission of information coming from the reality to go from cell to cell. So they were like hormones. So they changed the name to neurohormones because we already knew that hormones distributes information to different parts of the body. But then they began to realize that neurohormones and various hormones in the body, they distribute information to cell systems. And these chemicals allow the transmission of information to go from cell to cell. So they're a little different. And so they call them neurotransmitters because they allow the transmission of reality information to go from cell to cell. And as a breakthrough in the field, it suddenly became apparent within the last 3 years or so that all mood-altering drugs interfere with neurotransmitters. Since neurotransmitters transmits reality information, the information is distorted. And now you have distorted information acting and entering into the brain to change the perceptions. And for the first time, they understood the basis of the perceptual change that occurs after you take a mood-altering substance. Now, if you have screwed up perceptions, what happens to the ideas based on screwed up perceptions? They're screwed up. And if the ideas are screwed up, what's going to happen to the behavior?
It's screwed up.
So the bottom line is going to be the alteration of human behavior. And it will be a secret disease. A disease that tells you it isn't one. And since you do not realize you have the disease when you're sober, how are you going to follow the prescription for a disease that you don't think you have? Let's take a mood-altering substance. And in this case, let's take alcohol. It's the first known mood agent to mankind. What does alcohol do? Number one, it's a depressant of function. It reduces the function in the brain and nervous system. It slows down your reaction time. That's why many times there are accidents, because of the reaction time slowing. Number two, it's the first known tranquilizer. It's a euphoric agent. It makes you feel good. It gives you a party effect. Number three, it's an anesthetic agent. First known anesthetic, and incidentally, it was abandoned as an anesthetic because it was considered too dangerous an anesthetic to use in humans. It's also a sleep-inducing agent, as we have indicated. But we're mainly interested in these two particular characteristics: depressant of function and a pleasure-producing or euphoric agent. And it occurs at the same time you take the drug. In fact, all these characteristics occur simultaneously, which indicates that different systems in the brain are being involved. Now, if you depress the function of your leg by destroying the leg or injuring it or breaking it, what do you think the body tries to do? It tries to get its function back to normal, correctly? If you injure or damage your heart, what do you think your heart tries to do? Heal it. Get it back to normal. That's known as the law of homeostasis. There's never been an exception to that law. And if I've found an exception to that law, I will get the next Nobel Prize. So when you damage or injure or depress the function of the brain, it too obeys the laws of homeostasis. And the brain, being the controlling organ of the body, it has massive defenses, and it tries to get that function back to normal. You have taken a substance that is depressing in function, and so the body now produces biochemicals called neurohormones and neurotransmitters that are excitatory and alerting in nature in an attempt to get that function up to par, up to normal. As these excitatory neurohormones and neurochemicals build up, you lose the euphoric and pleasure and party effect of the drug. So what do? You take more. What does the body do when it's depressed in function? It tries to get its function back to normal, obeys the laws of homeostasis, the laws of biology. And it produces more excitatory, more alerting neurohormones. As these build up, you begin losing the euphoric and party effect of the drug. So what do? What does the body do when it's depressed? Builds up more excitatory agents to get the function to normal and up to par, get the system going. What do? You want the effect, so you continue taking the drug. What does the body do when it's depressed? And this continues. Now this will continue without letting up, without cessation, until finally, as you escalate the dosage of the drug, you reach a point called overdose. Now this will happen with every mood-altering drug you take, without exception. And if any one of you will review your own lives, you will begin to see that there's been progression, and slowly but surely you have seen increased tolerance. But that tolerance is disguising from you the fact that you're getting closer and closer to overdose. Thank God most of you won't overdose. As you get closer to overdose, you begin to understand that that's going to happen, and then you hear on the streets this being said: I don't take drugs anymore to get high. I take them just to feel normal. Because to take them to feel high, you know you're going to have to escalate them that much more. And to do so puts you in jeopardy of overdose, and you won't do that at that point. At that point, you are a very, very risky state. You're ready to die. How come it doesn't happen more often with alcoholics? Because with alcohol, overdose is in the range of like 2 quarts of hard liquor a day. At that point, the patient gets a gastritis. We have one here now. He is forced into the hospital because for the last week, he has been unable to drink, eat, or take anything. And the only thing he forced down was alcohol because it seemed to give him relief. At that point, he can't overdose because he can't get it up a little bit to the point of overdose. He enters the hospital, it prevents him from overdose. You see? Okay. At some point, you reach a point where you decide you need help and you stop the drug. Let's take the drug out. Let's observe what's happening. The drug which was on this side is now gone. But there is a lag effect, and what now happens is there is the unmasking, the exposing of these alerting and excitatory neurohormones that now backlash and cause what is known as the alcohol and drug abstinence syndrome. When you're abstinent from drugs, abstinent from alcohol, you are now stark, raving sober. Agitated, aggravated, irritated, tense, jerky, and nervous, hyperreflexia, startle reaction, kicking the habit. And all of those symptoms have that biological basis of the unmasking of defensive neurotransmitters and neurohormones that are excitatory in nature, which were being produced when you're under the depressing effect of a drug. And while you are here, I will attempt to reduce and rebalance these neurochemicals and neurohormones in your brain. But sad to say, the best I'll be able to do is to get that tension, get that excitation and hyperactivity down approximately 50%. And so when you leave here, you are still going to be stark raving sober, and that has biologically reduced your ability to cope with normal tension because you've got a limit to the tension you can take, and now you've sensitized the system in such a way that you are super sensitized to any added tension, and any added tension means that any problems related to your family, your children, your wife, or the job puts you at the peak tension at which you cannot biologically surpass. At that point, you correctly identify with the tension and you say to yourself and the people around you, if you don't stop, you're driving me to drink. I cannot take it no longer. You storm out of the house. You blame the people around you, not realizing that it's your sensitivity that has reduced your ability to cope. And you seek out relief. And you believe falsely that that is the solution, because when you take the drug, the tension disappears. And that tells you you have the solution and they don't. And therefore you're correct and the doctor is wrong. And so mentally and psychologically, the drug itself is creating a change in your thinking patterns into thinking that this is the solution and not the problem. Well, that is only part of the problem. Let us move deeper into the human brain. And let us realize that this human brain is not just a row of cells going to the brain like I have demonstrated. It is much more complicated. In one nerve, there may be 100 nerve cells, more or less. In the spinal cord, hundreds of thousands of cells with messages going up and down the spinal cord in different tracks and patterns, all of which I had to memorize in medical school. Let us put in another pattern here and see what's going on in more detail. You take the mood-altering drug, it passes the blood-brain barrier. There's a barrier there that actually prevents most substances from entering. But these substances enter and they act on transmitters of information, and by altering the reality information, it distorts and changes the pattern. Now, how do we know that this pattern is changed into a negative pattern? A pattern that is not conducive to your health and is actually the creation and the acquiring of a disease, biologically speaking, because this will represent destruction and death. Well, we know that when you take a mood-altering substance, it alters a transmitter of information, and the perceptions change. If the perceptions were the same, the pattern would be the same. But since the perceptions are different, we know that the pattern had to change. We know there's interference of transmitters of information, and then recently they have discovered another instrument, something called the PET scan. Not the CAT scan. The PET scan, cats and pets, you know. But this is a PET scan. Positron emission tomography. And I have been lucky enough to be able to get a picture of this change and to show you how dramatic this change is and how the pattern change occurs and different systems and circuits are set up in the brain. I am now going to demonstrate for you that dramatic change. This is the picture of a normal brain pattern before a drug is taken. After 5 milligrams of this mood-altering drug, just 5 milligrams of that drug is taken, this is the pattern. And so there has been circuitry changes totally different than what existed in the non-drug state. And that creation of circuitry change represents something new and created and acquired that didn't exist before that drug was taken. And that is positive proof of that change. As time goes on, the person begins to prioritize in that negative pattern. An alcoholic wouldn't think of going to a hotel where there's no alcohol, would he? A drug addict wouldn't think of going to a country where there's no drugs. So now he begins to prioritize this pattern, re-emphasizing it and de-emphasizing the normal reality pattern. How is he going to learn coping mechanisms in reality if he's not there? He isn't. And as time goes on, he begins to link, associate, and attach to this pattern certain people, certain places, and certain things. And as time goes on, this pattern now becomes more entrenched and developed. And how is this pattern going to develop if you're not actively utilizing it? It can't. And so as time goes on, there is developing now what we would call the tree of death versus the tree of life. These will be seen to be opposites and contraries in every way. And as this develops biologically, it begins as a little shoot in the ground and begins to develop more into a bush and finally into a tree. And when it is developed sufficiently, this abnormally created and acquired pattern will divide forever the addicted from the non-addicted. And from that point on, there will be no cure, because biologically speaking, there cannot be. Are you going to cut that out of your brain? Are you? When it's diffuse and sent throughout in a different pattern throughout the brain system? And so now let's take a person who's taking a mood-altering drug and stop the drug. What happens? The blockage goes away, of course, right? This drug caused the blockage. The blockage now goes away. When the blockage goes away, the person reverts to the normal reality pattern. But horror of horrors, when he reverts to the normal pattern, all the tension shows up. The reflex, the rebound tension of these excitatory neurohormones that were built up to get rid of the depression now are exposed and unmasked in the reality pattern, and his thinking is normal. Since your thinking is normal in the reality, you begin to think and say, doctor, if you don't give me something, I'm getting the hell out of here. I can't, I'm sweating, I can't take the tension, my skin is crawling, I'm jerking. And if you won't give me something, I will leave. The hidden threat because you feel that I'm not treating you adequately, because you feel your body is out of control, and now you want relief. And the only relief you know of that you falsely believe is the truth, and since it's a false belief, it's a falsehood, you go into slavery, because only the truth will make you free. And so now you seek out relief. And when you get the relief by the drug that you take, you now cause progression of the disease, but you begin to think it's the solution. It's a false solution, because it seems like the tension's going away when actually the tension is being built up, and that you do not see or understand. And that is the secret of this disease. Let us now analyze what has happened. You see this pattern here, this tree of death? This pattern has been now created in your brain, and it didn't exist before. It's been acquired. And since this acquired pattern exists in your brain, you are now able to tune into that pattern anytime you want. And that's called attitude. That's the dry drunk syndrome. In drugs we call it the flashbacks. You can flash back into that pattern anytime you want, but if you flash back into that pattern while you are sober, you are now causing the disease itself of addiction to progress, even though you're sober. And now we see the phenomena of the disease of addiction progressing, even though you think you're getting better or are sober. This is what they mean in AA when they say he is sober, but he doesn't have sobriety. Because to have sobriety means that you've tuned out of that pattern and your thinking has changed. And this also brings us to an understanding when they say, if you relapse, you lose your sobriety long before you pick up a drink. You lose your sobriety when your thinking changes and you tune into that pattern. And even though you're not drinking, the people around you can see that thinking change, and they urge you to go to meetings, but at that point you think you're well, so why should you go? And you won't, and you'll deny because you feel better. If the diabetic, because he felt better, abandoned his prescription, what would happen to him? He'd relapse. And that's for the same reason that you relapse. Because at that point, you've tuned into this pattern. You've already lost your sobriety when you begin to think you can take a drink. When you begin to think you're well, you've already tuned into that negative pattern. And it's only a matter of time, because the disease is progressing and you will need relief very shortly. I feel sorry when you don't understand fundamentals that are so easy to understand. Do you know AA says this? Keep it simple, stupid. It's very simple. Do you realize that you leave this hospital often and you go down Route 17, and as you go down the Route 17, there are various units of disinformation at your disposal, precisely placed there to allow you and promote the disease of addiction. As you go down the route, thinking you're well, you will now see a sign that says, "Come home to Red." Johnny Walker, Red. And the minute you see that sign, unbeknown to you, you tune into that negative pattern. And now you have to make a choice that's subliminal in its effect. You must make a choice between Johnny Walker and Lucille, your wife. Now further down the line, you see another sign that says Southern Comfort. Now you know that Lucille is very upset with you because you have gotten drunk and taken drugs again. And so you're very tense and upset, and you believe that she's going to be all tense and nervous and yell at you when you get home. Wouldn't it be nicer to have some Southern comfort first? And the conflict continues, but let's assume you make the right choice and go to see Lucille. Surprise of surprises, Lucille looks at you and you look so much better, she thinks you're well. Of course you're very sick because you have an unstable sobriety. The sickness is in your sobriety, but now she thinks you're well. And so she welcomes you, and to your surprise, she gives you a kiss and welcomes you home. You look so much better, you're so much better now, and you're well. That's what she thinks. And so you're so relieved now that she's not yelling at you. But as time goes on, that same day, she now begins to tell you a story. And she begins to say that the children don't have a winter coat because you prioritized your money into the negative pattern. And then the landlord is now going to evict them in 5 days because you prioritized your money into the drugs. What are we going to do? Now, the fact that your wife and children are in tough shape is enough to create anxiety in anybody. And as the tension builds up, you tell her, let's discuss it tomorrow. And she looks at you and she says, I can't talk to you when you're drunk. I can't talk to you when you're sober. When the hell can I talk to you? And you say, look, we'll discuss it later. You're driving me to drink. She says, what the hell do you mean I'm driving you to drink? The tension escalates. And now you need relief because you reach the biological limits. You're hitting your top. You blame her and you run out and seek relief. You didn't understand, and neither did she, that the sign and the symbol did the trick. It suckered you back. It did the trick. It worked. How are you going to tune those symbols out of your life if you don't understand the relationship of those symbols to the triggering of your relapse? And so, if you start to drink at 21 years of age, we know it'll take at least 5 to 10 years to develop that pattern sufficient that it overcomes the normal pattern of thinking and reality, and you are considered an alcoholic. If it took you 5 to 10 years to develop and build this tree of death, how long are you going to need to rehabilitate yourself in this pattern here to get that pattern back to some semblance of balance in relation to the other abnormal system? If it took you 5 to 10 years to build, it should take you 5 to 10 years of rehab, and that just breaks you even. And another 5 to 10 years to get ahead of the game, is that enough? No. How are you going to get rid of those symbols in the society? That sign that says Southern comfort and should say Southern tension and hell. How are you going to tune that out? You can't. If another 5 to 10 years of training, maybe then. Well, hell, by then you're so old, well, the hell with it all. And that's another reason why there is no cure for this disease. And if any of you think all you have to do is come up to the magical mountain and visit Dr. D'Amico and go home, and you're cured, you'll be back. And if any of you think all you need to do is a short-term program of rehab, and when you leave it, you're all cured, it isn't going to work. And if any of you think you can go to a long-term program, and I mean by long-term, a year to a year and a half, and when you leave it, you're cured, it won't work. I have had the head of Daytop in here for 15 years. He ran the program. And when he left it, he thought he was cured and relapsed. I've had the head of other programs, such as Phoenix House, 10 years, 8 years, he was ahead of the program, and he relapsed. And I've had the head of Renaissance in here too. and he relapsed. And I've had people who have had 20 years of sobriety. And 20 years they thought now, at this point, they were well. And relapsed after 20 years. So you must work the prescription for the rest of your life. And there will be no easy solution. But it'll certainly be easier than the life that you're leading now. And it is a phony to think that the clean life is hard. The clean life is easy, but the illusion is that it is difficult. And the other life, the life of drugs, looks easy, but is of the most difficult and hard road to take. Everything is the opposite. And you who are addicted, you come here to get your head together and you're telling me what the function of the brain is. You and the scientists are now on the same track. You're here to get your head together. And when you integrate this and that and these ideas, you hook them up into patterns in your brain and you cause growth. And as you cause growth, you create, and so you're creating a temple within you, a temple of God or a temple of Satan, a temple of life or a temple of death. These are mirror images of each other, and don't ever forget it. Everything in this disease is the opposite. You take drugs to calm yourself down and they create more tension. You take tranquilizers to tranquilize and they cause more tension. You drink in the winter to warm up and you drink in the summer to cool off, and they change the advertisement and you don't even see it. They call it treatment while they give you methadone and make you more addicted than you were in the first place. How nice, eh? How nice. And these are mirror images. Instead of integration, you're going to get disintegration. Instead of growth, you're going to get regression. Instead of creation, you're going to get destruction. And hate is over there, and love is over here. Life and death. And as you continue to disintegrate and deteriorate, the tension escalates, and that tells you ought to take only more. And so don't think as you progress you will want it less. You will want it ever more. And I have had the sad experience of a young lady coming in here, and remember, women get cirrhosis of the liver quicker than men. And she came in at the poor young age of 34 or 35, a beautiful woman at one time. And now she comes in, and she's bloated up with cirrhosis of the liver, yellow and jaundiced, and she's so weak we have to carry her to a bed. And she cries out, "Doctor, doctor, help me, please, doctor." And I hear her weeping in the room. And I get up and I walk to her room. And I say, "What is it that you would like help with?" And she says, "Oh my God, doctor, help me, please. I feel so tense. Oh, my skin is crawling. I'm shaking inside. What can you do? Oh, doctor, please, please give me a drink." You see, now the tension has gotten so high, all she can think of is a drink for relief. And 2 days later, she died of cirrhosis of the liver. And so the disease is progressive. And it is progressive, ironically, not progressive in an arithmetic way. Arithmetic is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's not progressive that way. You know, when you start that little shoot in the ground, you keep building on it each time you drink, even if the interval between drinking is 5 years, 10 years, it doesn't matter. A month, a week, whatever. Because you never go back to where you started from. You continue where you left off. And so the shoot is this in the beginning. The next time you drink, it's this. And the next time this. And the next time this. And the tree is forever enlarging. And so it's progressive, geometrically. Not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. And towards the end it goes so rapidly, you wonder what the hell's happening. You begin to see you're going down so fast, and all of you have experienced one of your friends, and he's going down so fast, and you see it, and you say, hey, what are you doing? He says, get the hell away from me. Leave me alone. And then he dies. You've seen it. I don't have to tell you. You've been there. And that's why, you see. And so these are mirror images. Mirror images of each other. So, we now see the relationship for the first time between the various mood-altering drugs. We didn't understand the relationships between the drugs, but we do now. How is the relationship? How can we understand it? Well, anytime you take any mood-altering drug, it interferes with a transmitter of information and changes the pattern and makes your lifestyle feel and seem better. The tension goes away. You have a party. The girls get sweeter, the lights get brighter, the music gets mellower. So your life appears to be getting better when you're taking the drug. And if the change is great enough, it becomes so unique, that reality. It's so unique that now you begin to think that you had a revelation, and you begin to think you're God or a bird. And you jump out the window because you think you can fly. And I've had about 5 of my patients, sad to say, die that way because they thought they were God. Because if the change is great enough, you think it's so unique, you begin to think you're God or a bird, and therefore we can classify these by the degree of change that occurs in the brain. The greater the change, the greater you think your insights are. And when you stop, the tension is present and tells you ought to continue more. On the top would be LSD and PCP. What do you say? Drop out of society, take the pill, expand your consciousness. It doesn't produce an expansion of your consciousness. It produces a massive change in the pattern in your brain that makes you think you've got increased insights into life and makes you think your life is better when you're taking. And of course, the tension tells you when you're sober, you ought to take more to relieve it. And next, of course, would be heroin. And next would be a curse called methadone. Putting the fire out with gasoline. How nice! And what they'll do is they'll escalate that dose up to 100 milligrams, and as tolerance builds up, you got to take more. And they're going to tell you now that you're suckered in good, you can't take any more, and you cop on the street and you die out there. And they're going to say to you, you know why you died? They died because they relapsed. They didn't tell anybody that the reason you had to cop was because the addiction was so high. You had to. The tension was so now great. They forced you into a situation by which you died, and they could stand back and say, look, he just did it to himself. How nice, eh? Fantastic. And next will be marijuana. We'll discuss that later. Next the barbiturates, next alcohol, and lastly the tranquilizers that don't tranquilize. They increase your tension. And sleeping pills do not cause you to sleep. They give you insomnia. And these are the myths we must destroy. And you come here and you think you are being detoxed. How can I detox you when I am treating the absence of drugs? It's the absence of drugs that I'm treating. I'm treating those chemicals that are present when you have no drugs in your body. And that in itself is a myth, that word detox. How can I detox you from something that isn't there? I'm trying to regulate the abnormal chemicals and neurohormones that are present when you don't have drugs in your body. So how can I be detoxing you from drugs that aren't there? I'm not detoxing you. You see? These are the myths that must be destroyed for you to get better. And so, why are you here? You know why you're here? The real reason that you're here is because there was pressure put on you to stop. There was pressure put on you by the courts, your family, your friends, your wife, your children, your relatives. And when the pressure to stop overcame your pressure to take, that's when you went for help. And when you tell me you're here because you want to be here, that's full of bull. You're here because the pressure to stop overcame the pressure to take. And who the hell couldn't stop then? You see? I had a patient one time at the clinic, and you know, they say the heat in the kitchen, you know, the pressure stops with the boss. And so they sent the patient to me because they couldn't get any places with him. He was losing his family. He had 3 DWIs. He had a felony now. He was going to jail. He was losing his children and his wife. His health was going down. He'd been in the hospital 5 times, 6 jobs in 4 months. So I sat him down in the room. They sent him to me. Nobody could deal with him. I says, don't you think you have a few problems? He says, yes, I got lots of problems. He says, what about the relationship between all these problems and your drinking? He says, well, I got all these problems and that's why I'm drinking. He says, if I didn't have all the problems, I wouldn't drink. Everything's the opposite. So he couldn't see that the problems were linked to his drinking. He felt that the drinking was getting rid of the problems. You see? And so then I said to him, now look, you got all these problems. Have you ever tried stopping drinking? Would the problems go away? Have you ever seen that that would happen? And you know, he says, Doc, what are you trying to do? He says, I'm not addicted at all. He says, I proved that I was not an addict. Now, I wanted to learn something, you see. I've been in the business for 20 years, but this was a great learning experience for me. And so I said to him, boy, that's pretty good. I'd like to learn how you decided and proved you're not an alcoholic. And he says, well, he says, my wife, my children, my family, and all these people were against me, and they told me I had a problem. It was drinking. And I knew I didn't, so I decided to stop. Well, who couldn't stop with all the pressure to stop? It overcame his pressure to take, so he stopped. And then he said to me, he says, you know, Doc, I stopped. And that proved to me I could stop any time I want, so why should I stop? I'm still drinking, Doc, but I'm not an alcoholic. You see? So stopping. All addicts can stop. When the pressure is great enough, you stop and you look around for a friend. Because you're tense, jerky, and nervous with all these chemicals in your body that are excitatory in nature. And you look around for a friend. What better friend to find than your local physician? Doctor, I was poor and nervous. What can you do for me? And the doctor says, here's some Valium. How nice. From a liquid sedative to a solid sedative. From an injection sedative to a smoker sedative. How nice. You forgot. All who jump in the water get wet. You can't go from one pew in the church to another. Same church, different pew. All of it in the church of Satan. You see? And so now we can understand, because they all act on the brain in the same way, another phenomena, what we call cross-addiction, cross-tolerance, and cross-susceptibility. If you're addicted to one, you're addicted to all. If you're tolerant of one, you're tolerant of all. If you're susceptible to one, you're susceptible to all. And you can't move from one to the other and expect that anything has happened. And let me tell you, if you think all you have to do is move out of the community, I know why I have an addiction, you say to yourself. I have that because of the people, my family, the courts, and everything. I'll just move away. You move away from those who would stop you from drinking. And now the power to take a drink is unopposed. What's going to happen? Relax. That's the geographical cure, and that's why it won't work. You see, we understand the fundamentals with this disease now for the first time. And so if you think by moving from here to there will work, if you move with a purpose to move away from drugs and at the same time hook yourself with a treatment program, that is beneficial. But if you think by moving from here to some other community that that's going to do the trick, forget it. You haven't changed the polluted water. It's all around you. And you're going to relapse, you see. Because the power to take drugs is in you. The need is within you. And so, we now have seen what we call neuroanatomical and a physiological there has occurred, and we'll put it in English, a structural and a functional change in your brain that represents a maladaptation between you and your environment, and that is the definition of disease. You see, this pattern that's been created is a biological pattern that didn't exist, or a structural change has occurred in your brain. So there has occurred a structural and a functional change in your brain that represents a change in maladaptation between you and your environment, and that's the entire definition of disease. Lack of ease. Isn't that interesting? Stress. It's a disease of stress. It's a true dis-ease. Lack of ease. You see, this is not at this point just psychological. It is not just spiritual and social. It is also biological. And therefore you must understand that this biological change has altered you and changed your thinking patterns and the way you act and behave. And you must understand that, and that must be corrected, or else you're going to die. This is a neuroanatomical or structural change of the brain and functional change of the brain. It must behave like other diseases of the brain. Is that right? It sure does. If your father got Alzheimer's disease or any other biological disease of the brain, as he changed because of the disease occurring in his brain, you would say to him, "Hey, Dad, you're getting a little forgetful. You're losing it." And he'll say to you, "You're full of it. There's nothing wrong with me." You see, we have an axiom in medicine, and it goes like this. The closer the focus of the disease is to the human brain, the less insight you have until when the disease is in your brain. How are you going to have insight when the disease, as it progresses, destroys the organ that you need to get the insight with? Let's slow down on that one and give it to you one more time. How are you going to have insight in this disease if the disease destroys the organ that you need to have to get the insight? And so as you progress, you get less and less insight, and those who have the disease in higher forms and higher development have less insight, and they are most difficult to deal with because they are firmly convinced with their higher attention that they ought to take more drugs because that gives them relief, and that must be the solution. And how can it be the problem? And so we have now given you some insight into this problem. And now we can move from biology to the follow-up. We can now follow this up with what is known as the pathophysiology of addiction, its progression and its development in you, and move into the next phase of the lecture of this great experience. You begin at birth and you reach a period of time called adolescence. What is it in adolescence that results in the beginning of addiction in the majority of you who are in this audience? Well, it is a period of change from childhood dependence to adult responsibility, and that indicates stress. Change always indicates stress. You have sexual and biological changes in your body that indicate stress, and peer pressure. And all of that combined stress together has resulted in you being very susceptible to relief of that tension. Just when you're most susceptible, you are now exposed to drugs and alcohol that when you take them give you immediate relief and pleasure at the same time. And that indicates something of very, very serious import to the culture. Because all cultures that begin to deteriorate begin that deterioration by exploiting the weak, by exploiting the defenseless. In our culture today, we destroy our youth in the womb, and then in our most susceptible time of life, we expose them to drugs and alcohol. And when they take the drugs and alcohol, immediately they have the party effect, that the pleasure increases, and they think that the tension is going away, but the tension is getting higher because they're taking the drug, and they're very healthy, and the body vehemently tries to get its health back by producing massive amounts of excitatory agents. But how do they know that the tension's getting higher when they think the tension's going away? So they continue to drink for the party effect, and then they go home and go to bed and sleep, and overnight the body on a priority basis, what does it do? It priority stops all of the metabolism while it metabolizes the drug out of the body. Because all of the metabolism must stop to get the brain functioning, which is the control center of all other systems. So all metabolism stops except the metabolism to the drugs. And the body metabolizes the drugs out, and then these excitatory agents show up in the morning. And the tension always shows up in your intestinal system, your stomach. And it shows up in your head as a tension headache. So all of you have tension headaches or upset stomachs. Here even. Out there you call that the hangover. Now you'd think that the hangover would teach you something. That you shouldn't drink so much. But in our culture, again, the cultural conditioning is such that you go to school, and when you go to school, the kids say, "How was the party last night?" And you say, "Oh, what a party I had, what a hangover I got, what a beautiful party, you should have been there, and you're the hero of the class." That's another reward. We know in psychology, the more rewards you have following an act, it reinforces the act that much more. So what you don't understand is that is the introduction to the alcohol and drug-oriented club, and you have now become a club member, and this is the initiation rites into that club. And now you want to be a good club member. And so you want to drink with the best and drug with the best. And so now you continue to drug and drink. And out there you drink now so much you nod at nighttime. You have no trouble sleeping out there. In here you do. Right? And so out there you have no trouble sleeping. Now you're so heavily sedated with drugs. All night long the body metabolizes them out. And now the excitatory producing chemicals which were produced to help you get over the drug, exposed now and unmasked, these tension producing chemicals show up in the morning. And now you're tense and jerky in the morning, and you begin to take the hair of the dog. The hair of the dog means you begin to drug and drink it in the morning. Of course they open up the methadone clinic at 6 a.m., but you're waiting at 5. How nice, see? Sucker. And further along, the tension gets so high that you must drink and drug within 8 hours. That's the time you're working. So you smuggle the drugs and the alcohol onto the job, and you want to hold on to that job. So you smuggle the drugs on the job, and you get caught, and you get fired. And you get fired because you tried to hold the job down, so you become resentful. And now you lost your job. What happens to the tension? And as the tension gets higher, what happens to the craving for relief?
It gets stronger.
And now you're back on again, and you don't even know why. You don't even know at that point you're already addicted. And finally you get so bad, out of desperation, you end up in the hospital. Why are people in the hospital? Because they're well or because they're sick? Because they're sick. But in some hospitals, they let you walk around in your street clothes. How nice. You're not really sick. There's just something wrong with your head. You're just a little off. You're a little nutty. You need a psychiatrist, right? And yet you've always said that you're not crazy and you're not stupid. You're addicted, and you are right. And as the tension gets higher and higher and higher, do you need more alcohol and drugs to overcome it or less?
More.
More. You walk around the bar. Man, can I hold my liquor? And you see, you're so tense when you're sober, you need a whole quart of liquor before you can get your high. You're the sickest one there because you're sick in your sobriety. He's so tense in his sobriety, he needs a whole quart of liquor before he can overcome the tension and to get his high. And he thinks he's the best and wellest one there. Boy, look at my metabolism, wow. And they sucker you in the methadone program, escalate you to 100 milligrams, and you say, look, I need more than that, and if you won't give it to me, I'll go to 2 programs. How nice, eh? As the tension gets higher and higher and higher, when does the tension show up? When you're sober or when you're drinking?
Sober.
When you're sober, it shows up. That's when your thinking is normal, so you crave, seek, desire, wish, want, and beg, and pray for what?
Relief.
Relief. That's what you want. You people today even, you don't want drugs. You'd like to have a little relief from the sweating, a little relief from the nervousness and tension, a little relief so you can sleep at nighttime. What you really want is relief. And when anybody tells me that you people want to go back to drugs or alcohol, I know they don't know what the hell they're talking about. What you want is relief. And you're begging and crying for it. But the only way you know, because no one tells you the truth, you now go out and seek drugs and alcohol because they tell you that tranquilizers tranquilize and drugs will quiet your nerves down. You believe the lie and you go into slavery because only the truth will make you free. And you seek out that, and when the tension goes away, you believe you have the solution. If you have the solution to a problem, what happened to the problem?
It's gone.
It's gone. And that's denial. I'm not so bad, Dad. Give me another chance. It's just on weekends. It's only beer. It's just a little marijuana. Give me another chance. I don't need rehab. All the excuses. Because you don't really think you're sick. And you know, I gave a biological definition of this disorder at the beginning of this lecture. Yes, it is a primary chronic neuroendocrine related to these neurohormones and the nervous system, neuroendocrine disease of the brain and the autonomic nervous system over which you have little control, that has behavioral consequences. And your behavior is now changed by the thinking that has been created by the drug that you've taken. And you don't even understand it. And so now we'll give you the physiological definition. And it's very easy. Keep it simple, folks. Don't make it so difficult. When the tension reaches the point that you'd like to have a little bit of relief, that's the beginning of the disease. I'll say it once more. When the tension in your body reaches a point that you would like to have a little bit of relief, that's the beginning of the disease. From then on, you have the disease of addiction. And there'll be no cure. What happens if you ignore what I'm telling you and the tension gets so high that you refuse to go to the rehab program? Because if you go to the rehab program, you know they're going to confront you with your behavior, and that's going to increase your tension. And that's what you're trying to get away from, the tension, so you won't go. How are you going to get better if you won't go to the program that you need to get better with? How? You're going to get better. You won't. And you'll relapse and you'll have more tension because it's progressive geometrically. And at that point, how are you going to get help then when you were afraid to go before, when the tension at that point was too great for you to go. Now you won't go at all. In fact, you'll vehemently refuse to go because you don't want to increase the tension, because the rehab program, you know, is going to increase tension because it's going to try to treat your behavioral problem. It's going to try to change your thinking, and you know that's going to escalate your tension, so you won't go at all. From then on, everybody dies. And that is the second invisible line. That's the patient who repeatedly enters the hospital and walks out. That's the patient who comes in time after time after time, and all the nurses and all the staff say, "Why are you admitting him?" You see, this is the only disease which in its terminal stages, they kick you out of the hospital. They kick you out. Everything's the opposite, you see. And so, we've explained physical dependence, tolerance, and craving, which are major characteristics of addiction. Well, as the tension gets higher and higher in your body, what happens to your ability to cope with tension outside your body? We got a limit to the tension we can take. If you have a limit to the tension you can take biologically, as the tension builds up inside your body, your ability to cope with tension outside your body is going down by the same amount as the tension progresses. Now, do you people have more problems in your life than I do, or less? More. So you have more tension, less ability to cope with it. You're older and you think you can handle it, and you can't even handle what you could handle when you were a teenager. When you were a teenager, you could handle that much tension. Now you can't even handle that much tension. How are you going to take care of your families, your problems, your jobs? How are you going to take care of your children and your wife? Yeah. So if you don't get the disease under control, the rest is going, and you're going to lose it all. So you got to treat the disease first, you see. What's the treatment? Why do you make it so hard? Why does society make it so hard? Why do all the hospitals make it so hard? It's simple. It's so damned simple. Reorganize your life, change your priorities to lower the tension. As the tension comes down, what's driving you to seek relief is being reduced. If you reorganize your life and change your priorities enough, the tension will reach a point that there's none there. Not enough to send you to seek relief. At that point, you got good sobriety. Things are under control. Your wife, your children, your money, and your gun are back. You begin to get all the rewards. Why do you have all the rewards? You're operating on the prescription that's giving you your health. That's why. You've taken a right and correct choice. Since you make right choices, you are now a winner. People are losers when they make wrong choices. Now you've made the right choice, you get all the rewards of the right choice, and at that point you begin to think you're well. It's called the pink cloud. Since you think you're well, what do people do when they think they're well? They abandon the prescription, and in your case you abandon the prescription that lowered the tension. If you abandon the prescription that lowered the tension, what happens to the tension? And when the tension comes back, you crave for relief. And you're back on, you don't even know why. That's why. So, remember this. There are two dangerous points in the life of the addicted. What are they? All of you in this room who think that I'm full of shit, you're all going to come back and eat those words. And you better remember it, or you're going to die. All of you. And that will amount to about a little over half of you will take this seriously. If you take it seriously, you will begin to work the prescription by reorganizing your life, and we'll show you how to reduce the tension. It'll be so simple to do that you won't believe in it. Since you don't believe the truth, you go back to slavery. But if you do believe the truth, if you do believe how it will work, and you do have faith in what I'm telling you is the truth, you'll follow it. And when you follow it, as time goes on, the tension reduces itself, and you begin to get better. You begin to get back all the rewards, your wife, your money, your children, the job. Everybody thinks that you're great. At that point, you get the pink cloud, you think you're well, you abandon the prescription that gave you the goods in the first place. You abandon God's program, who wanted you to have a better life. And you relapse. I think in this room there's some people who relapsed because of the pink cloud. Is that right?
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of you. The pink cloud. So you've got to remember, folks, it's a chronic disorder. There's no cure. Work the prescription. We'll show you how it works. It will guarantee results. Just like other diseases, we now understand this disease. You see, there's something that's driving you nutty, crazy, and wild for a drug. The craziness and the nuttiness is the addiction. But behind the addiction is a biological problem that they do not tell you about because they don't want to tell you so they can sucker you in again. They keep telling you, like with marijuana, that it's just psychological. You believe the lie. And you believed it so much you even changed social structures and social laws. And you reduced the deterrent factor, and you reduced the penalties so that you could stay better a slave. How nice. You yourself produced the demand to change the laws so you could stay a slave. And isn't that nice? It worked so well with marijuana that they applied the same principles to cocaine, and you fell for it again. They told you it was just psychological. It's so addictive, you give it to any animal and he'll give up every single primitive drive that he has. He'll give up sex. He'll give up money. Well, not money, but you know, he'll give up everything. He'll give up everything. Food, sex, everything he desires normally. And he'll continue to inject that drug called cocaine into his system until he's dead. And they told you it was just psychological. You see, it created such biochemical abnormalities so quick that it produced a need in you, an appetite. It produced a demand for relief that you falsely assumed was to take the drug because when you took it, it gave you tranquility and calmed you down in a false calming which produced more disease, but no one told you about that, did they? And so this is what is known as psychobiology. And so today, you have seen and witnessed for the first time that great breakthrough. And you can identify it in your life. And so, this represents the psychobiology of addiction. And we've moved from biology to psychology and showed that your behavior is a consequence of the disease. That hopefully you have understood just a little bit, because we're now trying to help you. Thank you.